Welcome back, everybody. Doc Made Diet Podcast, episode number 3. All right, before we get into today's topic, I want to talk about a few items here, okay? Number one, the purpose of this podcast is to help inform. It's not necessarily to sway. I'm not here to promote my opinion just yet in this podcast. Really, we just want to talk about some common dietary methods, some common diets, and the common pitfalls of those diets and how we could help, if we're going to choose to do said diet, how we could help avoid those pitfalls, okay? So strictly informative. All right, so today's topic is vegetarianism, also a little bit of the vegan diet. Now, obviously, this diet has a lot of heavy moral weight, societal weight, environmental, political. People aren't protesting over the keto diet or over intermittent fasting per se, but people are protesting over this diet and the political landscape. That being said, we're not going to get into that today. Not going to get into the morality, not going to get into the environmental impact, any of that stuff. Going to talk about that in the future for sure, and I'm going to love to talk about that with you guys, but not the purpose of today's podcast. Today's podcast is to just break it down, talk about the most common pitfalls, and then at the end, talk about how we can help avoid those, okay? All right, that being said, first, most common pitfall of vegetarian diet, you probably guessed it, lack of protein. Now, many people may say that I'm, going after the low-hanging fruit by talking about people's lack of protein on the vegetarian diet, but it's true. Vegetarians' rebuttal to this, however, is that they can actually get all the protein they need from beans, legumes, seeds, plant-based foods. Now, the rebuttal to this is that you can't just go off of the grams listed for a certain food. You can't just look at that nutrition label and read calories, fats, carbs, proteins. Okay, I'm good. Because that nutrition label doesn't give you the amount of protein that you're actually going to extract from that food. That's called the bioavailability of that protein. Now, the bioavailability of plant-based foods, unfortunately, is not as high as it is with animal-based foods. Why is that? Well, plants, you have to remember, they're living things too. They have built-in defense systems. So we're not meant to absorb all that stuff. Now, we don't have the stomachs for it. Cows, they have multiple stomachs. They have a hindgut, foregut. They can actually absorb all those nutrients from the plants, unlike us. We can't do it. So that protein is not as bioavailable to us as it is to cows. Now, don't quote me on the stomach issue. I know they have multiple stomachs. I'm not sure what they're called. I know we have one. All right, good enough. All right, so for example, if you're going to be eating navy beans instead of steak to get your protein, let's look at that. So you're actually going to need to eat 3 times as many calories in navy beans to get the equal amount of protein as you could in a steak. That's 3 times the amount of calories, and that's a whole bunch of more carbohydrates because there are no carbs in a piece of steak. Why is that an issue? Well, look around the world. What's going up? What's skyrocketing? Obesity and diabetes, especially in this country, especially in America. So the last thing this country needs is a higher caloric intake, a lower protein intake, and a higher carbohydrate intake. We have plenty of that going around. So rule number 1, or problem number 1, is that the proteins bioavailability needs to be taken into account. Okay, so I know you can look at the back of a label, a pack of almonds, and say, oh, 15 grams of protein, great, I'm good. Unfortunately, not so much. And then think about all the calories that are coming along with that protein as well. Really makes it hard on a vegetarian diet to get the adequate amount of protein and also staying within a good caloric balance and a good carbohydrate balance as well. Okay, so that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is vitamin B12. Same issue. The bioavailability of vitamin B12 in plant-based foods is so low compared to animal products. Animal products are very high in B12. And B12 is important because when you lack it, that's when you start to develop things like anemia, memory issues, numbness, and even more scary, depression, anxiety, also behavioral mania and personality behavior disorders, all linked to lack of vitamin B12. Now, I'm not here to scare you and say that that's definitely going to happen, but you're more prone to that if you're going to choose this diet. Okay, so you really need to supplement vitamin B12. Absolutely need to. Now, again, with a supplement, the bioavailability of that is lower than animal protein. So you really need to be conscious of that and be aware of these problems. Okay. Number 3, third problem with vegetarian and a little bit of veganism as well, is that it requires you to really plan ahead, a lot of decision making. For example, if you're going to go out to eat at a restaurant, you need to check the website, make sure they're vegetarian friendly, which admittedly, these days, most restaurants are, so you have that in your favor. But if you don't, you're going to arrive at that restaurant, there's not going to be an option for you. And next thing you know, you're stuck eating a plate of French fries with ketchup or ordering a pizza instead of getting some good, clean protein, good, healthy food. Okay. Now, whether you're at a restaurant, say you're at home and you don't feel like cooking, you're going to be sacrificed and victim to whatever is in your pantry, whatever is in your cupboard. And most things that are in there stored up on the shelf, highly processed, high fat, high carb, low protein, pro-inflammatory, sugar-laden foods, okay? Because it's vegetarian doesn't mean that's healthy. Let's say you're at a cookout, all right? And you don't think ahead, you don't plan ahead. Instead of having a nice piece of grilled chicken or a steak or even a burger without the bun is fine, you're going to be stuck eating potato chips, potato salad, whatever's laying around, whatever's on their pantry at a friend's house. So my point is, if you don't plan ahead, you're going to be victim to whatever is available. It's out of your control. It's out of your hand. And the next thing you know, you're eating a bag of potato chips, you're eating snacks, gummy worms, potato salad, eating pizza. Instead of planning ahead and being able to have good, clean sources of protein, you're just subject to whatever's there, which isn't good. You got to take control. You got to plan ahead. And doing that is hard. And that's problem number 3. Problem number 4 is that the vegetarian replacement options for meat, they're not very good, man. Now, a lot of times, instead of the meat, restaurants will substitute dishes. They'll substitute just cheese for the meat. Salad, tacos, sandwiches, whatever you're eating, enchiladas, they'll substitute cheese in for it instead of the meat. For example, getting a cheese enchilada as opposed to a chicken enchilada. I don't think it's controversial to say that cheese is not a health food. You can't substitute in that cheese and think you're okay. The cheese has about, 70 to 80% of the protein in chicken, but 3 times the calories. Also, it's dairy. So if you don't digest dairy very well, which most people don't, it's going to cause inflammation. Now, another problem with the vegetarian replacements is the fake meat burgers, right? The Beyond Meat, the Impossible Burger. Those things, guess what? Loaded with gluten, loaded with soy, additives. They're highly processed, and all those things in there are going to be pro-inflammatory and delete the purpose of you doing this diet for health to begin with. It's going to make your health worse in the long run because of all the stuff that's been added in to replace the flavor of that meat. It's also generally, guess what? Higher carbohydrate count as well. And like I said, the last thing we need is people eating more carbs. Okay, now carbs aren't evil. They're not always the enemy. It always has to be in context of your workout and what else you're eating throughout the day. But generally speaking, people are eating way too many carbs and way too many calories. Okay. Now, last thing is another deficiency, which is omega-3s. So there's 2 types of omega-3 fatty acids. There's DHA and EPA. And our brain is largely made up of DHA. It thrives on it. It needs those fatty acids that are found in animal products. Okay. Again, the bioavailability of those omega-3s in plant-based foods is really, really low. And omega-3s, again, are so important for our brain health. A hypothesis for why they're so important for our brain is that, evolutionary speaking, when we figured out how to create fire, and therefore how to cook our food, cook our meat, eat it, and digest it easier, that's when our brains essentially exploded and we became the dominant species on the planet. We're able to think critically. We're able to get in communities and figure out how we can survive, and not only survive, but thrive and build communities and tribes. And we'll get into that later at a later date, but it's pretty cool when you look into it. Everything makes sense health-wise We're looking at it through that evolutionary biological lens. Okay. Makes sense? All right. So those are the 5 most common pitfalls. Number 1, the protein is not as absorbable. Number 2, vitamin B12 deficient. Number 3, it takes a lot of planning, preparation, looking ahead, which is hard because most people can't keep up with that. Number 4, the vegetarian replacements suck. Cheese is not a health food. That's not controversial. Number 5, lack of omega-3. Okay, so like I said at the top here, I've had plenty of people who have done this diet, vegetarian, vegan, and have had great results. Okay, it can be done. It's just hard. Okay, I can't recommend doing it from strictly a health perspective because of all these pitfalls are hard to work around. But here are 5 ways we could help prevent that from becoming a major issue. So number 1, what you have to do is you have to supplement with a protein powder. Okay, it's got to be a pea protein powder. You can't do whey or casein, so it has to be extracted from a vegetable if you're going to truly adhere to the vegetarian diet. But it's better than nothing. Okay, it's not going to be as bioavailable, but at least you'll get your protein needs up a little bit higher. Okay, number 2, you got to supplement B12. Not going to be as bioavailable as it is from food, but still better than nothing. Number 3, you got to plan ahead. You got to look ahead. Where am I going this weekend? Am I going to be out of town? What restaurants are available? Which is a pain in the butt, but it has to be done. Number 4, learn how to cook. Okay, that way you're not, subject to eating the junk food in your pantry because it's vegetarian. All right. Again, cheese is not a health food. Number 5, got to supplement omega-3, okay? Especially if you're vegan and not eating any eggs at all, or a certain type of vegetarian not eating any eggs, really got to get that omega-3 high, okay? So important for so many health processes, been linked to about every health disease there is, okay? Cancer, heart disease, brain health. Can't emphasize the importance of omega-3 enough, okay? So like I said, I've worked with many vegetarians, many vegans before. It can still work. We could still work with them. We could still achieve health. We could still lose weight. We could still be happy. It just takes a lot of work. Okay. Now, I'll get into the moral, environmental impact later on at a later date. I look forward to doing that, but wasn't the purpose of today's podcast. Okay. Hope that was helpful for you guys. Those are the top 5 problems with vegetarianism and also 5 ways to help combat those problems. All right. So if you have any questions, email me. Message me on Instagram, leave a comment here on YouTube, follow me on YouTube, subscribe on SoundCloud, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 4.